Hello friends, this video on body fluids and circulation part 4 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. So now we will discuss the third component of blood, that is the blood platelets. Now the first thing that would come to our mind is when we talk about platelets is you would have observed that when you get a cut or an injury, what happens? Like sometimes while cutting vegetables, you might cut your finger, or using knives or something while working on your project work, you might cut your finger or you hurt yourself somewhere. So what happens? It starts bleeding. So here if you see this lady, once she gets injured, her hand starts to bleed. Now when it starts bleeding, initially what happens is blood oozes out of your skin and blood keeps flowing, keeps coming out from inside your body. But this process does not continue forever. After few seconds or to the max few minutes, what happens? The bleeding stops and a clot appears at the spot of injury. Right? You would have observed this for yourself. So you see a clot like this, as you can see in this picture. Now when we talk about platelets, we are actually going to talk about this clotting of blood, because platelets play the most important role in the process of blood clotting. Now the question is, what happens in that area of injury that you actually see a dark red spot there and the bleeding stops? So how that dark red spot happens there, which again eventually goes off. So what is that magical thing happening during clotting of blood when you are injured or when you get a cut? So we will talk about that, and the one who is responsible for this clotting of blood is this component of blood, platelets. So platelets are extremely small in size when compared to RBCs and WBCs. They exist in large numbers, maybe around 2 to 5 lakhs per microliter of blood, which is still less than the RBCs because they were in millions per microliter. They help in blood clotting. That is the most important part about the blood platelets, that they help in blood clotting. So here you can see they are quite small cells. They are also produced by the large bone marrow cells called megakaryocytes. Now, as I said, that RBCs and the WBCs, they were produced by the stem cells, and these platelets are produced by megakaryocytes. The word mega means big or large, and karyocytes, karyo means related to nucleus. So these are large bone marrow cells which produce the blood platelets. Now we will talk about coagulation of blood, or which is also known as blood clotting. That how this clotting of blood takes place. So blood clots in response to an injury. Now you do not see blood clots just like that, right? When you hurt yourself somewhere, when you cut yourself somewhere, bleeding starts and eventually a clot appears. So the clot formation takes place in response to an injury. Whenever you get injured, as a result of that, you tend to get clots. Now, clot formation occurs due to a protein called fibrin. So, these proteins play a very important role in the process of clot formation. So, here in this topic, we are going to talk about how the blood coagulates, or how the blood clots, how the clot formation actually takes place. So, platelets are the components which initiate clot formation. However, there are other clotting factors which promote clot formation. So we have platelets to initiate the process of clot formation, and we have other components present which promote the clot formation. So we will talk about the process stepwise. So the components which are involved in clot formation. So till now, what are the components of blood which we have talked about? We talked about the red blood cells, we talked about the white blood cells, the platelets, and the blood plasma. In the plasma, we saw that there were many plasma proteins which were present, which I said that they help in the process of clotting. So out of all these components of blood, which all are involved in clot formation? The first one is platelets, because they are the one who initiate the clot formation. So they are the initiators. And the next one is the clotting factors present in plasma, especially the plasma proteins like fibrinogen. So they promote the process of clot formation. So the platelets and the fibrinogen together help in clotting of blood. So now we want to understand how exactly the clotting takes place. So we will try to understand the process now. Now what happens is that whenever there is an injury, why bleeding occurs? Like if you cut your hand, why does it start to bleed? So let me talk about two scenarios. You would have observed that if you press your finger very hard with your hand, does it start to bleed? No, right? Because you are giving the pressure, or you are trying to hurt your skin, and your skin does not have any blood vessels. But instead of that, if you try to take a knife or a sharp object and you try to penetrate it inside your skin, what happens? You tend to get a cut and it starts to bleed. That's because there are blood vessels which are present beneath your skin. So whenever there is an injury which causes bleeding, that happens due to damage to the blood vessels, because there are blood vessels inside our body which are carrying blood. So when those blood vessels get injured, only then bleeding takes place. Now, when the blood vessels get damaged, bleeding starts. Now, how to stop the bleeding? Now, as soon as there is an injury, or as soon as, now, what is this blood? Blood is nothing but the plasma or the fluid-like structure which carries all other components along with it. Correct? So now what happens is the platelets get stimulated when they encounter a damaged vessel. For example, let us suppose, so this happens somewhat like this. Let us suppose this is the blood and the blood is flowing in this direction. And let us suppose there is a ruptured blood vessel somewhere here. Okay. Now all the components of blood are flowing along with the blood. It is something like if you keep a paper boat on a river, what will happen? It will flow along with the river. Right? So in a similar way, as the blood flows throughout our body, the components of blood flows along with it. Now when the platelets are one of those components of blood. Now the platelets, as soon as they encounter a damaged blood vessel here, what happens? They get stimulated. So the platelets kind of get activated. Now, as a result, all the platelets start to gather at the site of injury. So, this is the site where the blood vessel has ruptured. That means this is the site of injury. Now, all the platelets start to gather at this point. Now, what happens when these platelets start to gather at this point? A rough clot kind of a structure starts forming. So, this initiates the process of clot formation. Now, these platelets in turn release substances that activate the clotting factors in the plasma. So, they gather, that is one point. So, they actually start forming a clot kind of a structure at the site of injury. On top of this, they also release certain substances which help in activating the clotting factors which are present in plasma. Remember, I was talking about the proteins which are present in plasma, whether it is fibrinogen or globulin or albumin, they all are inactive in the plasma. So you actually need to activate them. Now out of all those plasma proteins, the one which actively takes part in clotting is fibrinogen. So fibrinogen needs to be activated in order to help in clotting. So these platelets release substances which help to activate fibrinogen. So what happens is, fibrinogen, let us suppose this was the fibrinogen which is present in plasma, but it was inactive in plasma. Now this fibrinogen gets converted into another protein called fibrin, and this protein is active, and this happens in presence of another substance called thrombin. Now from where do we get this substance thrombin? Thrombin comes from another substance called prothrombin. And where was prothrombin present? Prothrombin was another inactive substance in plasma. So the plasma has a lot of proteins in it, as I mentioned you before also. So this was another inactive protein in plasma which got converted into an active protein called thrombin. and this happened in presence of an enzyme called thrombokinase. So basically, platelets help to release substances like this, which help in conversion of the inactive proteins in plasma into active forms. So that is why the inactive prothrombin got converted into active thrombin, and this active thrombin helped to convert the inactive fibrinogen into active fibrin. And this fibrin actually helps in the formation or help in promoting the blood clot further. Now what happens? A series of enzymatic reactions lead to the formation of fibrin, and fibrin is the most important thing as far as the structure of the clot is concerned. Fibrin is nothing but a network of threads in which dead and damaged cells of blood are trapped. Now, when the blood vessel get injured, there will be many dead cells and damaged cells involved. So, what will this fibrin do? These are like net-like structures, something like this, and it will trap all the dead and damaged cells. So, basically, your blood, the neighboring blood is free from all the dead and damaged cells. So, all of them are trapped by a network of threads, that is by fibrin. On top of that, there are platelets which have also gathered together. So all these things together lead to the formation of a clot-like structure at the site of injury. So something like this. So I think I have written it on top of the picture, but still just try to have a look. So this is how the blood components are present in the plasma, right? These big structures which you see, these are the red blood cells, and the smaller ones are the platelets. Now what happens at the site of injury? So if you say this is the site of injury, so all the platelets tend to gather here, and all the dead and damaged cells are covered up by thread-like structures like this. That is the fibrin, and this is how the clot formation take place at the site of injury, right? So whenever you get injured, your blood vessels get ruptured, because of which bleeding occurs. Whenever the platelets encounter a damaged blood vessel, they tend to gather at that site. They also release substances which help to activate the inactive clotting factors present in plasma. This leads to the formation of fibrin and platelets together lead to the formation of the clot. So basically, if you see that it is not a single factor, it is not only the platelets which help in clot formation. There are multiple factors involved, like the platelets, the fibrin, even calcium ions present in these enzymes help in the process of coagulation. Now, another important thing that is to be discussed here is that this clot which is formed, it cannot last forever. For example, when you get a cut, the bleeding stops after some time and the clot is formed. Now that clot also needs to disappear. So how the clot will disappear, or how will you make sure that the clot doesn't spread to other parts of your body? It should remain limited only to the site of injury. Now it is very important that the clot should not spread to other parts of the body, and that is why there are anti-clotting proteins which are also present inside our body. So what are these anti-clotting proteins? See, this is something interesting, please understand. So there are anti-clotting proteins which are also present. An example of anti-clotting protein is antithrombin. So its function is just the opposite to that of thrombin. So the presence of this anti-clotting proteins actually help you to reach a balance with the clotting factors. Now, as the damaged tissue heals, body slowly degrades the blood clot and reabsorbs it. So what happens is, whenever you get an injury, the blood vessels are ruptured. So the platelets and the fibrin together will form the blood clot. Now they are in the blood or the plasma, you also have proteins which are anti-clotting factors. So they do not let clotting to take place. So such proteins are antithrombin. So after some time, and now as the blood vessel starts to heal, so these anti-clotting proteins will get activated and they will help the clot to get reabsorbed by the blood, and that is how the clot will disappear after some time. So it is to be taken care that the clot formation occurs only at the site of injury, and it should vanish as soon as the injury is healed. So with this, I think we have discussed about all the four components of blood. So by now we know what is blood composed of what are the four components of blood and what are their functions. Now we are going to talk about a very interesting topic of our day-to-day life. Thank you. Please visit www.examfear.com to watch more videos, attempt free online test, get free study material, find tutors and mentors. Thank you once again.